Hi everyone, welcome to our last Leader to Leader webinar for the year. Tonight we're going to be discussing inclusion, and we're going to hear about some of the new program materials coming out this coming year. But before we get started, I just want to mention that if you have any questions throughout the webinar for our presenters, you can type them into the question box that's located on your toolbar on the right-hand side of your screen. So tonight on the panel we have myself, Melissa Ilias, the Program Coordinator for Service Unit and Troop Support. We have Linda Kalish, Director of Program. We have Mary Jo Archambault, Assistant Professor at Southern Connecticut State University. And we have Alice Straight, a longtime Girl Scout volunteer. And before we get started tonight, I do want to mention that although this is our last topic for this year, we are going to be doing Leader to Leader webinars again next year, so if you have any ideas of topics that you'd like to see or learn more about, please email them to program@gsofct.org and put Leader to Leader as the subject. And I also want to mention that just in case you've missed any of our past Leader to Leader webinars, they are available on our, they're all recorded and they're available on our Girl Scout YouTube channel. So our first presenter tonight is Mary Jo Archambault, and she has a degree in educational leadership. She's been a certified therapeutic recreation specialist for over 10 years. She has experiences working with individuals with a wide range of abilities within both clinical and community settings. She is right now assistant professor at Southern Connecticut State University. And she's also a co-founder of Southern's Institute for Adaptive Sports and Inclusion Recreation, and she is a certified inclusion specialist. So Mary Jo, whenever you're ready.
Hi everyone. I hope you're all doing well tonight. And one more thing I will add to that list is that I was a Girl Scout leader for, I'm going to say about 7 years. So I am very familiar with Girl Scouts. I was also a program specialist one summer at a Girl Scout camp. So I think Girl Scouts is wonderful. So tonight we're going to be talking about inclusion. And when we talk about inclusion, I just want you to understand that just because we say, you know, we have this child with a disability and this child, we're allowing this child into our troop, it doesn't mean that that child is fully included. And that is what we refer to as integration. So integration is when somebody is allowed to be part of something, but we don't fully include them. So I'm going to go over some basic principles of social inclusion. And if you'd like more information on this, everything that I got is actually from a colleague of mine who is from SUNY Cortland. Her name is Lynn Anderson. So the first principle that we're going to talk about, principle 1, is frequent and consistent opportunities to get acquainted. So one of the things that I found as a Girl Scout leader is that oftentimes my girls would already have natural cliques. So Susie and Jenny and Amanda, you know, they would always be together. And we'd have another 3 over here and maybe another 2 over here. So one of the things that you can do is start off by doing icebreaker activities. So every meeting after you do your, you know, your typical opening exercises, I would do some icebreaker activities for them to just get to know each other better. One of the things that I enjoy doing is getting kids together who aren't normally together and having them find different things that they have in common. So if you do have a child who's being isolated, maybe that child is diagnosed with autism, or maybe that child has Down syndrome, getting that child with another peer and say, okay, I want you to come up with 10 things that you have in common, and have the girls do that. I find that to be a great activity if you make it like a little bit of a competition. Another thing is breaking into small groups, and you as the leader, you know, that's when you take control and you divide the girls up. Many different ways of doing it. Even in my classes, one of the things that I do is I take a deck of playing cards And I go through myself and I figure out, how many 2s I want or how many 4s. I divvy them up to the girls, and then I divide them up. So this way they're not with the same clique. And so same thing using pairs or partners. I encourage wearing name tags. Often in Girl Scouts you tend to have the same girls every year. That's been my experience with it, but definitely that first meeting I would have everyone wear name tags and just go around and introduce themselves. The second principle is equal status. So equal status is really making sure that we're treating all of our participants the same. So we have to be careful. Sometimes that nurturing side of us wants to take that child maybe who has the disability, or you see that a child's being left out and you want that child to be, hey, why don't you be my helper? What that does is it actually sets the child apart from the other girls. So it's actually better to make sure that everyone is a part of the decision making, that you mix up groups and responsibilities, so that, let's say the scout that's in my troop is Taylor, and Taylor is the one that has a disability or is being left out. You don't always want her with you. You would want to say, okay, this week it's Jenny's turn to be my assistant. The other thing that would be important is to change the format in which information is given. So from my experience, we tend to do a lot verbally. When you're working with kids who have autism spectrum disorders, they have difficulty with verbal directions, and they do much better with pictures. They do better with schedules. So it's, you might want to think about having alternative ways of getting, like what we're going to be doing today. So maybe you say it verbally and then you also have it on the wall. Asking different group members to demonstrate, not the same girls. We also tend to have those girls that want to volunteer for everything. So who can show me how to? And Susie's hand goes up. Okay, Susie, you've done it. Let's give someone else a try. Assign different roles and activities. Break down activities and skills. So again, oftentimes we may think that something is very simple, but for some of our participants, we really need to break down the steps. So even something as simple as saying, okay, everyone, I want you to sit down, grab a pen, grab a piece of paper, put your name on top, and then write, 5 things you want to accomplish this year. You've lost a child already by doing it that way. Really breaking down your directions, making sure that everybody is keeping up is really important. And then if you look at the last bullet point, all participants, they're not paying, well, do we pay dues for Girl Scouts? It's been so long. I think we did. All participants are paying participants. So there are no special breaks, no charity cases, no special volunteers. So just making sure that we treat everyone as equal participants and that we value everyone. And that's the big one. So principle 3 is about having mutual goals. So one of the questions that I'm often asked is, okay, how do you get that child to be a part of something? I'm having a hard time. I'm having a hard, this child tends to wander. They tend to sit by themselves. If you come up with projects that are mutual goals projects where you really have to have teamwork, it really will help with that problem. And it's up to you. As the leader, you have to set what the mutual goal is. You set the tone of what that afternoon is going to be like. Again, everyone plays. Everyone should have an opportunity, whatever it is you're doing, rotating positions, instill spirit and camaraderie, give feedback on progress towards the goals. So let the kids know how they're doing. Like, I'm so proud of you. You've all worked together so hard. It's so nice to seeing everyone included. I would even start off talking about what inclusion is with the kids. You know, what does it feel like to be left out? And one of the things I did my first day of class, and you'll probably get a laugh out of this, but there was a class, it was a summer class. I had 3 boys in the class and the rest were females, and college level class in the summer. And the 3 boys had had me before. So I do my opening icebreaker. I give everyone a card they have to read. And I go around the room and I would purposely skip the boys. And, you know, now the boys are raising their hand. And I would just say, okay, this is not time for questions. Please put your hands down. But if a girl had their hand up, I would ask them. This went on for about 20 minutes. And you can see the boys, they're looking at each other. They're like, what happened to her? Like, she was such a good teacher over the, you know, semester. I don't know what happened during the summer. So we stopped and I said to the guys, I'm like, how do you feel? And they go, we feel like you didn't even want us in the class. And often, and sometimes, I'm not going to say often, but sometimes we tend to go towards those kids that have the right answers, and there are other kids who are sitting there who are really being left behind and really want to be a part, but they just don't know how to do it. So principles, I got off a little track a little bit, but principle 4 is about cooperation and interdependence. You know, the great thing about Girl Scouts is that you have a troop, so you have the ability to promote team spirit and group identity, which other organizations often don't have this. So using team nicknames, they already have their uniforms, so they already look part of a group. And now your objective is, how do I make a cohesive group? Keeping verbal communication clear and using cooperative activities is going to be huge. Principle 5 is about receiving accurate information about the person with a disability. So again, I bring up that icebreaker about similarities versus differences because oftentimes people don't know. They don't know that just because Johnny's in a wheelchair, he can still play wheelchair basketball. He can play wheelchair rugby. He can play sled hockey. Like, there's so much he can do. We have our own perception of what people can do based on their appearances. So having that icebreaker where you do similarities versus differences, I think would be very helpful. If you have a child, or even if you don't, I think talking at that very first meeting, how we all are different, and that some people learn differently. And the kids will get that because you have some kids that are your visual learners, some are your verbal learners, some, you know, they have to do something in order to grasp it. So I think, you know, you could explain that to them in a good way. The other piece of this is assume a can-do attitude. So for all of your troop members, like when you're thinking of doing something, it should always be, okay, we can do this, and then it's, how am I going to make this work? What do I need to do as the leader? What might I have to change? Create an environment of open communication so that kids feel comfortable asking you questions. And if you do have a child who has a disability, you should leave it up to that child if they would like to share that with the troop. And in some cases, that disability can be like an elephant in the room. And by the child being able to share, like, hi, I'm Susie, I have Down syndrome. And what that means is it takes me a little bit longer to understand things sometimes, and let them explain it. You know, and I would, if you do have a child with a disability, I would talk to the parents first and just say, you know, I think it might be helpful if, you know, your child could share about their disability. What do you think about this? And get their input. And then draw attention to individuals when they are doing something very well, and that's all individuals, not just your child that has a disability. Principle 6, which is fair and tolerant norms. So again, you want to treat all of the kids equal, because what happens is kids are very observant, and look, you know, Susie is always Miss Mary Jo's pet. You know, Susie gets to do whatever she wants, and you don't want that to be the case. So don't patronize, don't overhelp, role model positive and accepting behaviors as the leader. We talked about rotating positions and roles. So when we're doing activities, let's say we're just playing a game of kickball. Letting different people be the pitcher, letting different people be at first base. Emphasizing teamwork, and that's something that, you know, you're very lucky being a Girl Scout leader, because, you know, part of being a Girl Scout is working together, and I think these principles really tie in so nicely into what Girl Scouts believe in already. Reinforce rules and fairness. So if you have a rule that you have to keep your hands to yourself during a meeting, okay, then if Susie starts patting someone on the back, it's not okay for her to do that either. So I'm just thinking of some of the kids I've worked with who have Down syndrome, and oftentimes they can be overly friendly. And you have to have the same rules for everyone. Principle 7 is going to be on, oh, sorry, there is no principle 7, but what I wanted to talk about was adapting and modifications. So these are things that you can do. So if you have a child that has a disability, has different learning needs, you can't change the child, but what you can change is your approach. And I really believe that by you changing your approach, you are going to get more success. And let me tell you, I teach now, but every Saturday I work with kids who are on the spectrum. I do 2 groups. So, and I have some challenging kids I work with. And I know that many of you might have challenging kids. So I want you to know that as I'm talking to you about this, I'm doing it. So teaching style. Teaching style is, how do you present the information? How do you conduct your group? You know, and it's young boys that I work with who are on the spectrum. And what I found I had to do was, when they first come into our group, I needed to give them 5 to 7 minutes just to burn off their energy. So what I did is I have free play for my guys. I don't know if that's appropriate for, you know, your scouting situation, but it's something where you have to think about, so what is the problem? So with these boys, I can't do anything with them until they burn off some of their energy. And for some of them, they have to do some self-soothing, where I have them bouncing on a ball just to get them to a state where they can participate. So that's what I mean by your teaching style, and I'm going to go into all of these. But there are rules, so rules to games, that's what we mean by rules. So if you're doing any sort of games, you can adjust the rules as the leader. Equipment. Do I need to modify the equipment that we're using? And equipment could be pens and pencils. And then what's the environment, which we'll definitely talk more about that as well. So if we go to the next slide, the teaching style, you need to be aware of who's in your group. And by using appropriate language, I don't mean like, you know, you shouldn't be swearing. I mean by appropriate language is, do they understand what you are asking of them? And for some kids, you need to use visual aids. So for my guys that I work with on Saturdays, and they are between the ages of 5 and 8, I actually make up a schedule. It's all picture cards of exactly what we're doing. The very first picture card is free play. The second picture card is circle time. And I think another good thing about Scouts is I know when I was a leader, we started and ended our meetings the same way every meeting. And having that consistency is also good, so that if you have that child who happens to be on the spectrum, and even for other kids, they know what to expect. So using visual aids, demonstrations. So it's always good if you're going to be making something, it's good to have a sample of what that final product is going to look like. It's good to show, like, so if we are, I'm just trying to think here, if I'm doing, building a campfire, okay, we would do a campfire, we'd do it with pretzels and, not one that you'd start on fire, but I remember teaching the girls and we'd use like the little pretzel sticks, but we would demonstrate what it was they were supposed to do. Another thing that's very helpful is using a buddy system. And again, you assign the buddies. So you have that child that may need a little extra help. By you pairing up everybody, the child doesn't stick out. So it's just not little Susie who has a buddy, but everyone has a buddy. When you're giving your instructions, short and to the point, short and to the point. They don't need an elaboration. And then the last point is check for understanding. So is it that, sometimes we get frustrated when the kids we're working with are not doing what we want them to do. And sometimes it's because they do not understand what it is that you are asking. So by checking for understanding, giving them a buddy, I think you're going to find that it's very helpful. The next slide, rules. So rules, if you're playing something like tennis, you could allow for more bounces. You can go through these. I don't know how often, we never played a lot of games as a Girl Scout leader, but you can go through these on your own. One of the ones I will bring up, though, is reducing the competitive element. So if you are doing a game, and we'll take the game volleyball. So maybe you're working on some badge and you need to do outdoor sports. And so you're going to do volleyball. If you keep the game competitive and you have a child with a disability or even a child who just does not have that athletic ability, they are going to feel left out. If you are doing the volleyball game, you could really make it, there are different ways of making it so that it's not competitive. One of the things I used to do with my kids is we would see how many volleys they could get back and forth. We would say that before the ball went over the net, each player on the team would have to hit it. And then we would talk about it. Why did we do this today? And the kids know, because everyone got a chance to participate. That's right. The next slide is some best practices in teaching. And again, some of these we've already talked about, but small steps. So giving them one direction at a time, breaking up a large task with small fun tasks. So let's say you're working on something pretty big in your meeting. You might, if you realize that there's a child who's going to have a hard time sitting through that, then break it up. Say, okay, this is what we're doing today. We're going to work on this for 20 minutes, and then we're going to break because there's a new song that I want to teach everyone for camp this summer. And then you do something fun like that, and then you get them back to complete the big task. If you look at the example that I have there on the bottom of your screen, it says if the planned activity is a scavenger hunt, and let's say the child doesn't want to complete the scavenger hunt, having them just find one or two clues at a time and then giving them a break to do a preferred activity. There was a young man that I worked with this young man, he was on the spectrum. He was probably about 14 years old. And we were trying to get him to do these different group activities. It was actually stations. The first week that we worked with him, we couldn't get him to any of the stations. All he wanted to do was play basketball. So what we decided to do is that we would say to him, okay, we're going to shoot baskets, but first you need to go to station 1. He would go to station 1, and we would say to him, we're going to work at station 1 for 5 minutes. And we would set the little timer. When the 5 minutes went off, then we would go and we would let him shoot baskets, and then he would get back to the next activity. Now, you have to realize if you're doing something like that, you may need another person there to help do that, or another older child that could help along with that. Okay, so our next slide, knowing the individual's likes and dislikes, because then you'll know what would that reinforcer be. One of the little boys I work with on Saturdays loves trains, wants to pretend he's a choo-choo. So last week when I'm working with him, he's, come on, miss, let's be a choo-choo. I said, listen, we can do the train, but first this is what I need you to do. So it's using that reinforcement, because what we want is we want all the kids in our troop to be engaged. So if we can get somebody engaged, even if it's for half the time, that's better than not using these strategies and not having them engaged at all. Repetition is another great way for people to learn skills, and patience. Patience was what we need. So we just have to remember, sometimes, we have individuals that might need some coaxing. I really like the reinforcement piece a little bit better than the coaxing, because if you go back to that equal status, I don't want to be spending most of my troop time trying to coax Daisy into doing something. I find with the reinforcers, you get a better outcome. So our next slide is you need to set the expectations. And I think that sometimes we don't set our standards high enough. So if you expect someone to do well and you hold them to that, sometimes that's all they need. We have this other young boy that I work with who's in our group, and he does not have autism spectrum disorders. He has ADHD. And with him, I have to be very clear with what the expectations are. And I have to be very firm. And by doing that, he does much better. So the first week that we had these kids with us was the first week that we met them. So we really did not know much about them. And that first week's, I tried coaxing with him. Sometimes reinforcement will work, sometimes it wouldn't. And the second week I said, you know what? I am just going to set the law down. Like, this is the way it is. So you need to, what might be helpful is for you to think about trying different strategies, because they all are not going to work with everyone. But with this child, does it work better if I'm firm, if they know at the beginning what the expectations are? Do they need a reinforcer? So the second bullet here I just want to bring through, and this is definitely more for our kids who are diagnosed with autism spectrum disorders, is increasing the sensory arousal through different movements. So for the young guy I work with that needs this, is he actually, I hold his hands and he bounces on one of those big exercise balls. He does it for a few minutes when he comes in, and then he's able to participate. It is amazing. Okay, our next slide. Only reinforce positive behaviors, not negative behaviors. Those boys that I told you, well, one of the boys I told you about, he will say things that try to get a rise out of you. So our very first group, we were going around, we had to introduce ourselves. What's our favorite leisure activity? So this little boy, he's like 7 years old. He says, killing people. And I think he thought he was going to get a rise out of us. So we looked at him and we said, oh, that's not allowed in this group, so maybe we need to bring you back to mom. Oh, no, 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 no. So, you know, it's really, you want to make sure, because sometimes our attention can be a positive reinforcement. So sometimes we have those kids that act up because they just want you to talk to them. So just be careful. What are you reinforcing? And the errorless learning method, which you can read this one, when teaching the individual a new skill or game, guide the individual through each step with prompts so they complete the full task completely. This will help foster confidence, and as the confidence in the individual grows, fade out the prompts. So what I mean by this method is that really, you know, if you have someone who seems to be struggling and is very unsure of themselves, sometimes just giving them attention that first meeting and helping them along, so knowing what the steps are. Okay, so we start off with this opening, I forgot what we say, it's been so long, but our opening remarks, and leading them through that might be helpful. Okay, our next slide, because I know I'm running out of time.
That's okay, take your time.
Equipment, there are lots of different changes. I think in Girl Scouts, this may not, depending on what badge you're working on. So you can look through this, and if you're doing a badge that you are perhaps doing sports, these are some ideas that might make it easier for some of your participants who have disabilities to be able to participate. The environment. This is huge. So think about, where am I holding my meetings? And what are the distractions? So if you have children who are on the spectrum, some of them are hypersensitive to things in their environment. Those things can be noises. So even having a fan blowing can drive some kids just absolutely crazy, and that's all they will focus on. The lighting can be a problem. So really just being aware of what is in the environment. Reducing, if you're doing an activity, you might also want to think about maybe reducing the size of the room. For kids that are using a wheelchair, thinking about the surface, they can be able to maneuver easily. You know, in the environment could be something like lowering the nets, as far as if you're playing a volleyball. So our next slide is some things, you know, oftentimes people ask about behaviors. What can I do? The child doesn't have a disability that I know of, but this child, their behaviors are, it's hard for me to conduct the troop. So maximizing that structure, putting, you know, having your rules on the wall. And what works out really great is having the kids come up with the rules on that very first meeting, making that part of the meeting. What are we going to do this year to ensure that all of our meetings are, you know, the best meetings they can be? So having,
That's okay.
having, I think that would be very helpful. Sticking to a routine, stating those expectations, and following through. So if if you say, listen, there is no swearing in Scouts, and if you swear during Scouts, you are going to have to take a timeout, or I am going to, you know, let your parents know when you get picked up. You have to follow through. Another thing is, the more you can engage that child who is having the behaviors, the less behaviors you're going to see, and to continually acknowledge the good behaviors. So, you know, if a child is acting up because they want attention, if you start giving attention to the other kids, Susie, nice job working on your dream catcher. Jennifer, oh, I love the colors you picked on your dream catcher. You know, that other child is going to want your recognition too. So be free with your compliments, and, you know, when people are doing things good, let them know. And then come, like, what are my strategies going to be? Like, what can I do as a troop leader when there are inappropriate behaviors? It's not like we can send the kids to the principal's office. So I think you need to come up with, like, what are the consequences in our troop, and letting the girls know what those are. Okay. Some other possible prevention strategies: offer choices using pictures or actual objects. Just really quickly, there was this little kid, and what happened was during snack time, the teacher would say, you know, would you like cookies or would you like an apple? It was cookies, apple, or milk. And the child would say milk, the teacher would give the kid milk, and the child would throw it. This would go on, and the teacher was just beside herself. So somebody suggested to her, show the child what the 3 snacks are. She did that, and the child picked the cookies. So for some of our kids, they, you know, they may only remember that last item that you mentioned. So sometimes that's a problem. It's the communication. Another great strategy is giving kids a heads up. 5 minutes and we're going to start cleaning up. Because for some kids, they need to have, you know, transitions are very difficult for them, and if you can just give them some time so they know when it's coming up, they do better. And if you notice that you have a lot of kids who they have a hard time staying on task, shorten your group time. Do a lot, you know, do smaller activities within that group. Okay, our next slide. We're almost there, ladies.
Oh, I think we're there.
Okay. Does anyone have any questions? I know I went a little bit over.
That's okay.
Hopefully that was helpful for you.
Yeah, that was great. Thank you, Mary Jo.
You're welcome.
If anybody has any questions for Mary Jo, please feel free to type them in the question box on your toolbar. We don't have any questions right now, but we might have some later, so I'll let you know if I see any, okay?
Okay, thank you.
Yep. Our next presenter tonight is Alice Straight. Alice lives in Meriden with her husband and 2 children. She's been a Girl Scout leader for 7 years and currently has cadets. She has served on the council's Long Range Property Planning Committee, and she works in the communications department at Pratt & Whitney. So Alice, whenever you're ready.
Great, thank you. So in addition to being a Girl Scout leader and a mom, I have several girls in my troop, including my own daughter, who have special needs. My daughter has Down syndrome. Also in my troop currently, I have 7 girls. I have 1 girl who has a traumatic brain injury that stems from being hit by a car when she was 3 years old. And then I also have another girl who deals with anxiety and depression. Over the years when my troop was much bigger, when the girls were younger, I, in addition, had a couple of girls who had ADHD, which was often at odds with my own daughter's needs. So that became sort of a fun balancing act at time. I want to talk a little bit about the picture you see on the screen. So this was taken 2 years ago when we were at Timber Trails for our service unit camp array. And that's my daughter Nicola up on the low ropes course. And if you've ever been to Timber Trails and done the ropes course, one of the challenges is to go from one end to the other using just, I think it's called swinging vines, just the various ropes hanging along the way. So my daughter does not like being on unstable footing because she has issues around balance and just motor planning. She finds this a very difficult thing. And the girls otherwise in the picture, not all my troop. We were actually paired up with another troop to go around and do various activities. And so with all the girls' encouragement, Nikki made it from one side to the other by herself doing it. We had all the girls just spotting her, none of the adults. Couple of us, so within the town of Meriden, there's actually several leaders who actually will pitch in and help out with my troop when I need it at these sort of events, because sometimes my daughter takes a little more prompting. So the woman whose back is to you in that picture is one of my daughter's favorite leaders within our service unit. She adores Miss Heather. And so it was really Miss Heather prompting her to keep going and keep trying. That got her across the bridge at the end, because Miss Heather bribed her with a hug if she made it all the way across. So this is actually one of my favorite moments over the last 7 years in Girl Scouts, and it's not so much that it was my daughter, but it's more the fact that even the girls in Miss Heather's troop who don't really know my daughter all that well, they all went to different elementary schools. They would only see each other at big events such as this. They were all sitting there encouraging her, making it across. My daughter wanted to give up after she first stepped up on that rope to make it, and it was really the other girls sort of encouraging her. So in Meriden, when I say build a team in your troop and in your service area, we've managed to do that. Our service unit really functions really well together. We have a large number of leaders who are very active. We tend to do a number of events throughout the year. So over the years, the girls have gotten to see each other at those events. And it's gone from where girls in other troops don't know how to approach Nikki, to taking the lead from the girls in my troop and watching them all go off and play together or do other activities together. So one of the big things is, and it's probably been easier at times for me than some other troop leaders to get this, is the open communication with the girls and parents. Because it's very apparent my daughter has special needs, I found that other parents are very willing to share their own daughter's challenges. So it allows me to get to know the girls and what their needs may be. As I mentioned, I had a couple of girls with ADHD, and sometimes their needs were very opposite of my daughter's. My daughter tends to like order and quiet and a solid routine, and these other girls needed much more motion and activity and would be much louder. So we oftentimes had to try and find within the troop a sort of balance between those two things. We learned that one of the things that all the girls enjoyed and it really helped make the rest of the troop meeting enjoyable was, as the girls came in, they would often start playing red light, green light. We met in the cafeteria at our elementary school, so there was room for them to be able to do that. So the girls who needed much more motion and activity were able to get that in at the start of the meeting, and then it made the rest of the meeting a little bit quieter and easier, calmer for everybody else, and to be able to go through and work on what we were working on. So work backwards at times. When I go through and I look at the badge requirements as we're working on various things, I have to admit I go outside the book and outside the step requirements often. But what I often tend to do is, because I know after 7 years with the girls, I know what their strengths and weaknesses are. I'll often not so much try and adapt a project to the girls, but I'll find a project that I'm fairly certain all the girls can manage independently, or as independently as possible. So rather than trying to go through and adapt a project for my daughter or figure out how to make the project work just for my daughter, I often look for projects that work with their strengths. This has led to a couple of jokes within my troop. There's a joke that there's no such thing as macaroni necklaces. When the girls were daisies and brownies, at one point they wanted to make Christmas presents for their family. And after we worked several stations with some of these presents, one of the moms made a comment about, I really expected this to be macaroni necklaces. And, I sort of laughed and I said, I can't do those because my daughter can't string beans. Going through and stringing beads on a string, she wasn't able to do that because of her fine motor skills. So it's led to a lot of outside the box thinking. When we've done craft projects, the girls often sometimes are doing projects that most people wouldn't think of until older girls. So as brownies, my girls were doing things like, I think one year we went ahead and we did some really simple like food gifts for them to give to people, but the only adult help any of the girls needed on one of them was they did vanilla sugar. So an adult cut the vanilla beans and the girls did the rest of it, from scraping the seeds out and everything else to measuring. But one of the, as one of my parents said, I would never thought that that would be a project to have first graders do. So do your best is going to look different. My girls have heard me say since they were little that it's not a mistake, it's a design feature, because my daughter would oftentimes get upset because her project wasn't coming out the way some of the other girls were, as well as a girl who has anxiety in my troop because it wasn't perfect, it wasn't right. So that became sort of a regular refrain in our troop, is that it's not a mistake, it's a design feature. It's what makes your project unique, just like you're unique. And I think this is sort of standard for anybody who works with any kid. Every once in a while you find yourself about 15 minutes into a meeting and you realize that the girls just aren't having it. So we always have a backup plan. These days we meet at the library. So sometimes that backup plan is sending them out to go find books about a trip that they want to go on. And so we go ahead and head out into the stacks, and they come back with the books because they've talked about wanting to do a couple of bigger trips, and we start talking about that versus what we had planned. We've also had nights where one or two of the kids just aren't having it. I still have coloring books, and the girls this age, sometimes that's all they want to do. And we've had a couple of meetings, especially around this time of year where the girls are doing their state testing. They're more than happy to just turn on music and sit and color and talk. And there have been times we've had meeting plans, and you can, just sort of see how they come in, that they're done. They don't want to sit here and do another thing like that. And those have been some of their favorite meetings. When they were younger, we used to do dance parties right around the time of the SBES testing, just to give them that sort of outlet. And that's pretty much it for me. If there's questions, I'm happy to answer any.
Great. Thank you so much, Alice. So if anybody has any questions for Alice, please feel free to type them in the question box on the right-hand side of your screen. There's not any right now, but I will let you know if one comes through. So Linda, if you'd like to talk about the new program materials for next year.
Sure, that'd be great. It's really, listening to the webinar so far, it's really interesting. I whoa, just lost you guys, sorry. There's a lot of good advice, and I hope that people take advantage of it. So what I wanted to do today is just talk a little bit about the new materials that are coming out from GSUSA. They'll be out for the troop startup in the fall, and what's happening is that we're having additional journeys to our selection. So right now we have the 3 series of journeys, and there are new ones coming out. So we're going to talk tonight a little bit about the new ones. The first set is our outdoor journeys. They're different in format because they combine 3 sequential badges, and then at the end of that, the girls will do a take action project. So instead of having the journey book, it's 3 sequential badges that are chosen by, determined by GSUSA, that go along together that help the girls learn about the outdoors, and then they'll do the take action project, and that will be the journey. So for Daisies, Brownies, and Juniors, they'll have it available online in the volunteer toolkit, which is an awesome tool that we'll have for our troop leaders and our families to look at once we get into the volunteer system in the fall, in mid-August. So last year the girls voted. There was a Girls' Choice badge that was chosen for outdoors, and the girls chose camping. So this outdoor journey includes that new badge. So the example that we were given for, because we haven't seen it all yet, the example that we were given in terms of sequential is that the Daisy, for a Brownie group, the Brownies would earn the first aid badge, they'd earn the hiking badge, and then they do the cabin camping badge, which is the new one, and then do their take action project. So it's very interesting that and cool that they're listening to the girls, and they're also listening to the volunteers about different ways of doing journeys and having them be a little bit more clear cut. As always, even though they have these activities that are in the badges, you guys know your girls the best, so you're going to adapt it any way you can that that best suits your group and the resources that you have at hand. And as long as you keep the idea and the intent of the activities, however you do it, that's okay. For cadets, senior, and ambassadors, we also have an outdoor journey which has the 3 badges and a take action project, but it's going to be cadet senior ambassadors won't have the ability on the volunteer toolkit, the online tool, to plan out your calendar. They won't have the components to put that to self-populate in your calendar, so it'll be a PDF that the girls and their leaders can look at in order to earn the badges, and the badges will also be available in the shop. So hope that makes sense. The other thing that GSUSA is looking at is adding more STEM, science, technology, engineering, and math opportunities to our badges and our journeys. And I think it's wonderful that they've been able to turn around and come out with so many new things for us this next year, because they've linked and connected with other experts in the field, so that it's not just GSUSA developing the materials, but they're actually working with people who do this in their own organizations. So combine the best of both worlds. So for the new STEM journeys, they are a 3rd format, I guess. So they're not a journey book like we have now, and they're not a combination of badges, but it's a journey. For Daisies, Brownies, and Juniors, it's going to come out on your volunteer toolkit. So the girls will decide which journey they want to earn. If they're, as a leader, the adult, you'll populate that into your calendar, and it will take your year, which might be 15 meetings to start. 6 of the sessions will be planned around the journeys. Again, you're in charge with the girls, and you can change them as you see fit. I look at it as a skeleton. So think like an engineer. It's all hands-on product design, and talking about what your design looks like. You're going to try it out and redesign it if something isn't working quite right. So thinking like an engineer, it's totally hands-on activities. For Daisy, Brownie, and Juniors, it'll be like 6 sessions long, 6 meeting times. Cadet Senior Ambassadors will have availability for that, but that won't be until 2018. Think like a programmer is all acoustic, I like to say. You don't need to have a computer. It's all getting the girls thinking about programming and how that mindset works. And so they're all unplugged activities that you can do any place with the girls. Again, it'll be available for Daisy, Brownie, and Juniors, and then Cadet Senior Ambassadors will have that in 2018. And thinking like a scientist, citizen science is really when everyday citizens are collecting information and data that are fed into scientific research projects. So a lot of citizen science revolves around the environment, not all of it, but the most of it does. And GSUSA is leaning towards outdoor and environmental, science where you talk about think like a citizen science. So I'm really excited. I think everybody that I've talked to in person has been excited not only about the topics that are coming out, but also being able to use the volunteer toolkit for Daisy, Brownie, and Juniors, and then in terms of this material. So in addition to the new journeys, some new badges are coming out. In order for the Daisies to be able to do their outdoor journey, there's an outdoor badge that will be coming out. It'll be available in the toolkit and in the shop. They're coming up with a new citizen badge for Daisies. All from Brownies through Ambassadors. We have that for our girls, and now the citizenship. And in these days when there's so much in the news about how people are treating each other and what we think of each other, and I think the citizenship badge for daisies is right on spot on. And then, of course, the Girls' Choice badge, which I referred to before, the new troop camper, which could be done on your own. It doesn't necessarily need to be part of the journey, but you can just do the troop camper badge. It will be available for daisies, brownies, juniors, cadets, seniors, and ambassadors. And then a robotics badge. So at each level, daisy, brownie, and junior, there'll be 3 badges that focus on robotics, and they'll be sequential so that the one builds on top of each other. One of the great things about the, people have asked about the journeys is, do they also count as a prerequisite for the bronze, silver, and gold? And yes, they do. So this gives a lot more options for our girls and our volunteers in terms of what journeys are available for them. So we're excited. We hope that you guys come out to our kickoffs in August. Watch for the dates. I know they're going to be on the August 23rd and 26th, and we'll be there with all the information that we have. And we really look forward to a great year, starting off with these new resources.
Thank you, Linda. If anyone has any questions for Linda, please feel free to type them in the question box. So just before we end tonight, I have some additional updates really quick. Our Philadelphia overnight trip is happening September 9th to the 10th, and the date to register for that is by June 1st. We're also going to be having an inclusion day next year in spring 2018. So that's still in the works, so keep your eyes open for that next year. It'll be a family day format. And don't forget, if you haven't already registered, done your early bird registration, the last day is June 12th. So make sure you're able to do that before June 12th. And also, we'd love to hear what you thought about this webinar. So if you have any comments or questions or improvements you think we can make or things you liked, you can email that to program@gsofct.org with Leader2Leader in the subject line. We'd love to hear from you. So does anybody have any questions before we end? I don't think so.